how military leaders make decisions is important. It provides context to the outcome of their decisions. And there is no greater display of this than when it comes to the equipment each branch of service is issued to perform its mission. And it is clear that allocation and commonality across the service branches is not even remotely considered when military leaders are signing their contracts. This is why the second pillar of military leadership and organization is equipment readiness, allocation, and commonality. And this is our focus of this episode of the First Branch. As you can see, I'm not in our studio this week for this episode, but I did the best I could with the lighting here in the hotel room. Hopefully it's not too big a distraction for you and that we can still focus on the content because this content is important, and I hope that this presentation isn't, the lighting of this presentation isn't too distracting. If you do like this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, tap that bell icon, and give this episode a good old-fashioned American thumbs up. And again, don't forget to leave a comment down below. If you write it, I'll read it. There's kind of this tongue-in-cheek saying in the military when new equipment training appears on our training schedule. And it goes like this. Looks like some general's cousin's going to have an awesome Christmas this year. Now, are generals really making deals with family members? Absolutely not. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's never happened, but by no means am I implying that this is in any way a standard practice. But what's telling about this statement is that every service member knows that when new equipment is issued, it was not sent to us with the soldiers or the unit's mission in mind. And not only doesn't the equipment work across service branches, there are times we don't even have interoperability with equipment inside the echelons of command. That is to say that the equipment that we have at, say, like the brigade level, it doesn't even have the ability to communicate with equipment at the division level or even echelons of command above the division level. And this greatly reduces reaction times when requiring a specific effect to achieve victory on the battlefield. Now, who or what is negatively impacted by an increase in this response time on the battlefield? And what is that impact? Well, the answer to these questions is simple. The longer it takes to provide the desired effects on the enemy, the longer they get to shoot it and kill our service members. You know, our sons and our daughters, our mothers and our fathers. And for what? So that the leaders at the higher echelons of command can retain release authority? Now let me shed some light on the answer to these questions by telling you a story. And this has to do with an opportunity I had to talk to the field artillery branch proponent. Remember in last week's episode, I told you about the warfighter exercise I was part of just prior to my retirement? Well, the proponent officer was there for that last week of the exercise. And when he found out that I was retiring, he sat me down for an impromptu exit interview. And the first question he asked me was, what are the top 5 things you would change to improve the Army's targeting effectiveness as a whole? I mean, I was excited that he set time aside to ask me my thoughts on how to improve the Army. But that didn't last long, though. Because right from the get-go, my first response was, replace the AFATADs with the JDOCs. And I mean, his response was immediate. And there was absolutely no hesitation when he said, and it was resounding when he said, Mike, that ain't ever going to happen. And we as a community need to stop bringing it up. Then why ask the question? If you have a superior software suite and the Army just refuses to use it, why ask the questions that are going to elicit this response? So I asked him, why is the Army so resistant to getting rid of the AFATADs and replacing it with the JDOCs? After all, it was the Army that developed it as the ADOCs to solve compatibility issues with the ROC Army on the Korean Peninsula. So here we have a prime example of how the military has created a superior piece of equipment and yet refuses to field it to the entire formation. Now, in full disclosure, JDOCs does require some massive server support. The software does use a lot of bandwidth. But in exchange for those massive server stacks, what our forces get is the ability to communicate both vertically through the chains of command, as well as laterally across the forces that are fighting with them to their left and their right. And since it was developed for the sole purpose of data and communication sharing with foreign countries, it solves the problem and issues with training and fighting alongside our allies. The clarity and up-to-the-minute battle tracking is superior to anything the military is currently using to provide their common operating picture. So if I were the SECDEF, the first change that I would make is that JDocs, heck, even if you wanted to keep AFATATs because of nostalgia, then let's pay for the licensing fees to rename JDocs to AFATATs. But JDocs would become the primary program for planning, establishing, disseminating, coordinating battlefield geometries, as well as being the primary means of battle tracking during the execution of a mission or even during training exercises. And there are two branches of services that are already using it, and that's the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy. So overcoming the issues in the joint environment are already in place. And because JDocs is Windows-based, the ability to establish communications and share battlefield graphics with allied countries would be much easier than our current methods. And because of OPSEC, I'm not going to discuss what our current methods are. Now, if you're one of those viewers that's saying to yourself, Mike, you just can't take one event in isolation and then reorganize the entire military. Well, that would be a fair judgment. So let me continue with yet another example of how a current asset has been poorly allocated and has resulted in a less efficient economy of force. And that asset is the A-10. Now here's where every Air Force viewer is going to want to take me out to the woodshed and beat me senseless. Well, many may think I'm senseless already, so there's that. And it's those responses that are my proof that this asset has been poorly allocated for the most ridiculous reason of all. Good old-fashioned American pride. Clearance of fires is the backbone of economy of force. It also happens to be the thread that ties combat power and the ability to mass fires together. And that is a fact. This is such an obvious fact that the United States Army restructured its entire staff elements by creating the Joint Air-Ground Integration Cell, or as we like to call it, the JAGIC, with the singular purpose of expediting fires. Now, I've participated in 3 different warfighters, and I've observed 2 different divisions going through theirs. The conclusions I have drawn concerning the allocation of the A-10 are from these experiences. And now let's harken back to the example I gave 2 episodes ago when we discussed General Calvert's conclusion on how to expedite an engagement of a complex target. Do you remember what his conclusion was? It was to do what? Just get more reps in. And what we learned from these warfighters is that we as a staff, through the JAGIC, can reduce coordination time. But one major limiting factor still remained, and that was clearance of fires. More specifically, deconflicting ground-based indirect fire systems with aviation assets. Now, for obvious OPSEC reasons, I'm not going to discuss what those deconfliction procedures are. But since the A-10 is the most used non-organic aviation asset the Army uses, reallocating this airframe to the Army would not simply reduce response time, it would eliminate it. Why? Because as an organic Army asset, commanders would have the A-10 built into the planning process, and the proper firepower timing options would be known before the first round is ever fired downrange. Look, I get it. I know there are going to be people out there that think this is crazy. What on earth would ever make me think that this idea would ever work? Well, would it surprise you if I told you that this concept is already in place at a smaller scale in our military? And now that I've said that, the more savvy military staff planner that's listening might already know where I'm going to take this conversation. And this direction begins with one simple acronym, because again, we love our acronyms in the military, and that acronym is the MAGTAF, otherwise known as the Marine Air Ground Task Force. And with the incorporation of the JAGIC into the Army staff functions, the command and control architecture is already in place. The only thing that needs to happen now is for the Army units to have their own organic aviation assets to support troops in contact. And this support comes by way of close air support missions. And the greatest aviation platform to ever be built for this mission is the A-10. And reallocating this asset is no slight to the Air Force. They still have strategic missions with long-range operations to fulfill core-level targets. And what's more is that since the Army divisions can be both a tactical and or operational level of command, this becomes an echelon where the Air Force would find its greatest usefulness and flexibility. So if I were SECDEF, this would be my proposal. And the bottom line up front, the Air Force would transfer the A-10 to the U.S. Army. There are currently 280 plus A-10s in the U.S. Air Force inventory. The Army has 11 active duty divisions, 5 soft groups, and 3 regiments that conduct tactical and operational level combat operations. Each division would receive 8 A-10s for a total of 88. Soft groups would get 3 A-10s each, totaling 15, with the 3 remaining regiments getting 3 A-10s each, totaling 9. The total A-10s to support CAS for troops in contact would be 112. 15 A-10s would be needed to train new Army pilots at an Army CAS course. 2 additional A-10 Army National Guard squadrons would need to be established, and they would receive 10 A-10s each. It would only take 147 A-10s to fulfill the mission requirements to conduct CAS to support troops on the ground, this leaving the remaining A-10s in the inventory to be used for cannibalization or as their hangar queens. This, however, would not be the greatest benefit to our Army. The single greatest benefit to our Army would be the freedom of maneuver and the reduction of airspace clearance requirements. Aircraft would already be on station, and en route times would no longer be a factor. Also, firepower timing options and gun target line deconfliction would already be resolved. So many benefits for the Air Force getting rid of the A-10 and allowing the Army to use this asset in support of troops on the ground. The ones I listed here tonight, they're just the highlights. I have also run the numbers on how each division would break down the mission sets for each A-10. And who knows, if the military does this, I might pull a Brett Favre and come out of retirement for a few years just to do a bit of flying. I mean, one can dream, right? Now let's transition this conversation back to the service member first, mission-driven mentality. In our last episode, I mentioned how basic trainees needed to leave their respective training centers with the proper driver's training to meet the needs of their incoming unit from the moment they arrive. This would require each branch to provide the equipment required to meet the need to enable the warfighter. With this mentality, enabling becomes intuitive to the system itself. We're beginning to see how it benefits the warfighter on the ground more than it benefits the commander in the talk. Let's listen to Herb Brooks' comments on this idea again, because it bears worth repeating at this time. All-star teams fail because they rely solely on the individual's talent. But the Soviets win because they take that talent and use it inside of a system that is designed for the betterment of the team. The service member first, mission-driven mentality changes how we view the warfighter and their relationship to the mission. Then, by its nature, establishes the processes to enable the service member to succeed. And this brings us to a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that's ammo. And I'm not just talking about the 5.56 or 7.62 ball ammo either. I'm talking about all those projectiles and rockets and all those kinetic munitions that make holes and craters. If our job as service members is to win wars, and if the way in which we win wars is to make the other guy die for their country, then why are our warriors spending so little time honing their craft? Why are they only going to the range like twice a year? Why is gunnery the only time crews are getting to fire their weapon systems with any great frequency? What's wrong with a platoon sergeant being allowed to add live fire to their weekly training schedule? You want to know why commanders don't trust their subordinates to have release authority for their weapon systems? Because they know that those individuals have not spent a great deal of time training on them. And that's true. So, since we need our squad leaders and our platoon sergeants to have the confidence to fire in combat, they need to be shooting a whole lot more than just twice a year at the range. And they are the ones that need to be leading those events. That is what enabling looks like. That is how winning is going to get done on the battlefield. Whew, just got a little excited just thinking about our warfighters being allowed to hone their skills with such freedom. Senior military leadership has created an environment where they reduce the influence of their mid-level NCOs to lead their formations and training. This has led them to conclude that they can't trust these NCOs to make critical decisions in combat. Yet the whole reason they lost their confidence in this was due to their senior leadership crippling them in the first place. Senior military leadership created a situation where they can claim plausible deniability and then blame it on the NCOs. It is this understanding that has led me to realize why the third pillar is strategic vision and organization. And in next week's episode, we're going to take an in-depth look at this pillar and how to improve the way in which our senior military leaderships makes decisions at the national level and across all of our service components. So, until the next episode, and before we say goodnight, I just want to personally thank each and every one of our viewers for your faithful support. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, tap that bell icon and give this episode a good old-fashioned American thumbs up. I also want to give a big shout out to a fellow Army veteran and for his channel, the JP8 Report. He provides in-depth analysis on local, state, and federal lawmakers' actions. And since he was a commo guy, you know he's got a face for radio. So go swing by his channel and give it a listen. The link to his channel is in the description below. And as always, have a great weekend, America, and God bless.